lovely assistant here. Can anyone tell me where do you see any part of the peripheral or central nervous system?
I'm gonna go with
Spine.
yes.
You're gonna go with a yes. Okay, what part? You saw the spine, and the spine is part of which division? It is part of the central nervous system. So there is the spine right through there. That is the spinal cord, which when we dissected the rats, hopefully you saw part of that. The other part of the central nervous system is the brain, which is, of course, concentrated right here. That's where most of your neural tissue is. So the peripheral nervous system would be what?
Would it be like the arms close to the spine or shoulders?
So as we look at the spine, which is going through the vertebrae, let me pull that out. There we go. Okay, you've got the spinal cord, okay, that neural tissue that goes through there, and it branches out. Once it leaves that spinal column, leaves the vertebrae, these nerves that branch out for it, these are not really to scale, okay? They aren't really that big in real life. Those are all of a sudden, that's peripheral nerves. Those are either afferent or efferent. They're either sending signals to the spinal cord for your brain to process, or it's being sent out from the brain back out to control something.
Which one is out and which one is in?
The afferent with an A is in, and the efferent with an E is out. That's not confusing one bit, and I'm glad. All right. So this brings up a pretty good point. What happens when someone injures their spine?
So they usually get paralyzed
Paralysis. Why?
because the nerves can't get to their lower body.
All right, so that is the problem with neural tissue. Whenever we were looking at rat brains, it was like pretty soft material. It's not held together tightly like epithelial or connective or even muscle tissue. It's just not held together by that same, it doesn't have those protein fibers that hold it together. Its main job is just to transmit signals from neuron to neuron via the use of neurotransmitters. That's its job, and it does a really great job with that. But it is not very durable. So that is why it's primarily the central part of your nervous system is always encased in some sort of body cavity, your cranial or your spinal cavity. I mean, that makes sense. Because if you do injure it, you cannot send signals. So people who get paralyzed or experience that, not only can they not send signals to be like, move the leg, they aren't receiving signals either. You may know, and this is not uncommon, I know several older individuals who are experiencing this or have experienced this, where they, their feet especially, they start to not be able to feel their feet, like where they're stepping, like they can't tell when they've put their foot down. Anyone know any older person that's experienced that? It's evidently not too uncommon. But I know some people that as they've gotten older and through neurological issues one way or another, they can move their foot, but they really aren't feeling when their foot is put down on the ground. So they have to be careful that they don't miss a step or step on something uneven and fall and something like that. And that's a neurological issue, right? The signal's not making it to where their brain can process it. All right. Okay.
But people break their back and don't get paralyzed.
Yes, you can have a spinal injury, and you could damage the tissues, some of the cartilage or the bone. And if it does not damage the neural tissue, you'll be okay as long as you don't damage it. Right? That's actually why, like in an accident, like if you hit your car accident, if you've ever been in a car accident, one of the first things they do is they slap on a cervical collar if it's a pretty major accident. And what that is a thing to support the weight of your head and to keep it from moving. So that way, if you have injured your vertebrae in your neck, which is a pretty tender place, it's so that way you don't further do something to it and damage your spinal cord, right? And that's a pretty standard thing after an accident, that they don't want you to further damage your spinal cord. All right. Okay. We should add, and why is that such a big deal? Won't it heal up? No. That's the problem with neural tissue, is it does not heal very good, if at all. And so it's a long road. If you do have some sort of spinal injury, you are not going to heal from it. You can reroute some things and regain some losses of function, but neural tissue is just not like other tissue, and that once it is mature, it just doesn't regrow or grow anymore. This allows us to maintain memories from the beginning of our lives, even when we're really old, but it also means that any damage to your nervous system is cumulative, and it just keeps on adding up over time. So it's both good and bad to that, but that's how it works. Okay. Talked a little bit about neurons yesterday and neurotransmitters. And I said we talk about the central and peripheral nervous system. And then we also will probably get to where we look at some of the different regions of the brain and so forth. What we mentioned earlier was if you're sending things out on your peripheral nervous system, the afferent part are those nerves that send and receive signals, receive and send signals to the brain, like senses of touch or taste or whatever. Whereas your efferent with an E is what your brain sends out to control elsewhere in your body. We further divide that down into the part that is voluntary or involuntary. Somatic means it is skeletal muscle, something you choose to do. Your autonomic division is your involuntary regulation. I'll talk a little bit about that. Other than digestion, what's something that's involuntarily regulated in your body? Breathing, right? You don't have to tell yourself to breathe, which is probably a good thing because we'd forget. What else? Huh? Blinking. That's involuntary. Heart rate. Heart rate is a good one. There's a lot of other little detailed things that happens that we don't have to regulate, which is great. Releases of enzymes, buffering in our digestive system.
Would hearing count? Like just the senses?
Well, hearing would be afferent. It's only to your brain. You don't send anything out to your ears to tell it to hear better.
Okay.
It just is always on receiving, right? Now, and this is something I'm not sure how far we'll get. That part that's automatic or autonomic, it's broken it down into a couple divisions too, which we'll also look at. We'll go skip that. All right, we'll look at it now. So the autonomic is the part that regulates non-conscious actions. And this is obviously really important for survival because that's, like you said, breathing, heart rate, maintaining homeostasis. And it's broken down into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, to understand this, basically, anything that's regulated in a human for the most part, and we talked about this briefly towards the beginning of the year, that it works through these control mechanisms where you typically nudge your controls either to excite or to slow down some particular function. It's not like you can set it at your body at a certain, like it's not dial that you set to 3. There's always chemicals that are pushing you back and forth so you stay within a range. If you need to get more energy, you're going to release a chemical that's going to release more glucose into your bloodstream so you can use it more, and then you'll have to release another chemical to release less, to take up or pick up the sugar in your bloodstream so that way you have less energy available or whatever, right? It's all regulated by these antagonistic systems that work against each other. This is no different, and really the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions really work against one another to regulate your body. And we'll probably use some examples of this. Okay? Your sympathetic nerve part of your autonomic nervous system, this is automatically controlled stuff. The sympathetic part is sometimes called your fight or flight system. Okay? This stimulates tissue metabolism. It increases your alertness. It prepares your body to deal with emergencies. Prepares individuals for sudden, intense physical activity. So what does that really mean? It means, well, this will help you make goosebumps if you need to. It reduces circulation to your skin. It will accelerate blood flow to your skeletal muscles, releases stored lipids for energy for your endurance muscles. It dilates your pupils. This basically, whenever you're about to do something that's dangerous or exciting or anything along those lines, This system activates to cause your body to be prepared to do more physical activity. Right? Now, that is not a bad thing. Think about it. I mean, as humans, you get in dangerous situations. Humans, for much of human history, were probably like always had some external threat, and you had to be ready to like go or fight or scare the animal off or go tackle something so you could eat it or whatever. And so this prepares your body physically for those things. Now, this is not a bad thing. If your body is constantly in this state, it would be a bad thing, because increased lipids in your bloodstream, that would contribute to heart problems. Basically, it releases a bunch of stress hormones, and being under stress is definitely not good for you long term. It's totally cool short term, because if you're getting ready for that ball game or for that wrestling match or for that really exciting thing you're going to do, this is good, right? On the flip side, you don't want to be like that all the time, where the other parasympathetic division comes into play. This is also called the rest and digest system. So in this system, this helps you conserve energy, okay? You constrict your pupils, you decrease your blood pressure so you can like chill out. It constricts your airways so you don't have to move the volume of air, you don't breathe as deeply. Increases your digestive activity, increases urine production. This is a weird example, but maybe you've been like all wrapped up in something and you've been like really doing something pretty active, and then once you quit, all of a sudden you're like, hey, I think I need to use the restroom or something. Like your body will pretty much quit, worrying about urine production and everything else while you're doing something, and afterwards this kicks back in. It's like time to get back to the regular everyday business, and all this stuff will kick back in. I really think it's interesting how in the sympathetic, you actually divert blood flow from your skin and you redirect that blood flow to your skeletal muscles. Why would you do that?
Because if you're going to do something like really physically active, then you'll need it more there.
You want the blood by the muscles, and if you get cut or something, you don't want to have a bunch of blood at the surface. You want to redirect that. So your body makes these subtle changes internally in response to your environment. Now, this is bad if you're under a high stress environment. You're constantly, even though you're not like under physical threat, but you're in that environment, it will cause a lot of the sympathetic stuff to happen, and it causes too much stress is not a good thing, and it does have long-term health detriments from it, right? On the flip side, if you're resting and digesting your whole life, that probably also isn't real healthy either, ultimately, right? Both are fine. Your body this is how your body manages that. Isn't that wild? I always think it's interesting. We go from these little cells connected together, and we get these systems that like really, change your body a lot. It's pretty cool. All right. Any thoughts about those two parts of your body's automatic regulation?
Is this why it said that you burn calories while watching scary movies?
Oh, I guess so. You burn a lot of calories no matter what you're doing, but would you burn more if you were in an environment where you are stimulating that stress response of the sympathetic nervous system? Yes. They even looked at like chess players, like high-level chess players. You think like, what do you do in chess? You sit there and you move a piece, but they're so focused and like basically all stressed that they actually burn a lot of calories doing that too. Right? So that's kind of an interesting thought with that. All right, let's get back to the physical part of this, and then let's take a look at the brain, the regions in the adult brain, what each one does, without going in too much detail, and discuss some of the implications of that. All right? So there are 6 regions in your adult brain. Here is an adult brain, and within this adult brain there are different regions. Let me try not to drop any parts of it. There are distinct physical regions, okay? And that's what we look when we want to look at some of these distinct physical regions of a human brain, because they do have some different functions. All right, so we've got the cerebrum, diencephalon, midbrain, cerebellum, pons, and the medulla. Right? This is an outside picture. This is not the parts I just mentioned. This is just on the external anatomy. I just wanted to mention that the different external regions, they just have names like the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Those would be called lobes of the brain. A sulcus is the term for one of those big folds in the side of the brain. You really don't need to know these. I just wanted to point out that if you've seen or heard those terms, it's an external anatomy on the brain. What we're going to look at is the actual regions inside of the brain, the physical parts.
Aren't all those different parts responsible for like different types of thinking?
Yes, and so those different regions or areas in here or there process different information. So if you would get hit in the back of your head on your occipital lobe, that could influence, if it damages this part of the brain, that could influence your balance, for example, because that's where you help to process some of that stuff. You also, in your ears is where those organs are, balance organs, and then they process it back there. All right, so these are the different in parts of your brain structure. The big part is the cerebrum. This is where you do your higher thinking. This is why we get to be like all smart and stuff, is we have this really, really big cerebrum that allows us to be smart, figure things out, that's responsible for intelligence. The rest of the stuff, though, that's like what everybody else has, and this is what runs things whenever you aren't really thinking about things. So that whole sympathetic, parasympathetic thing, you don't really think about it. Like when you're like, I think I need to like ramp up my heart rate, it just happens. That's regulated by some of these other things that you really don't need to think about. Okay? So what kind of things are that? Well, down here's of course the spinal cord, and then that goes up to what's called the medulla, the pons, the midbrain, diencephalon, and the cerebellum. And we're going to take a look at each of those. All right, so the diencephalon, which is the red, notice that the diencephalon and the midbrain, they're like connected to everything else. They're responsible for a lot of communicating just within the brain, right? And so that they might sound kind of similar because they do somewhat similar things, right? So the diencephalon, that mid part of the brain, helps to relay integration of conscious and unconscious sensory and motor pathways. All right, so what does that mean? You're constantly getting sensory information. Do you pay attention to it always? No, you totally don't. Like, I'm talking and you just drowned me out a long time ago, right? I mean, you just, right? That may have been unconscious or it might have been conscious. But you want to integrate, you don't want to really have to think about every bit of information you're receiving all the time. You want to kind of, decide, is this important enough for me to pay attention to, right? Like you might have that little thing poking you and it's like kind of annoying, but you kind of ignore it, and finally it gets to the point where you're like, I got to do something about this.
Siblings?
Or siblings, okay? This region contains the thalamus and the hypothalamus. These help to regulate sensory information and emotion, right? So this coordinates endocrine and neural activity. So this is really odd because this is the point, the interface between you actually affecting your body and you thinking about affecting your body. Do you release this hormone to initiate this thing, to cause this thing to happen, or do you not? And that is controlled in this region. It's odd, but you can think because you perceive your environment in a certain way cognitively, it will then cause your body to make some changes based on your perception. Like you being stressed out at the horror movie, you're going to make some changes in your body as a result. And this is kind of what this is talking about. This area also secretes hormones and helps to regulate your body temperature. The midbrain, this helps to process visual and audio sensation and helps to control your reflexes. What does it mean when we say a reflex?
Like if you were to burn yourself, you pull your hand back.
Right. Okay, so if we're talking about the midbrain, right? Let's say you touch the hot thing, okay? That signal travels through those efferent peripheral nerves, up your arm, through your spinal cord, And then here it comes up the spinal cord. Here's your midbrain right here. Do you need to let that neural signal go all the way up here to the front of your brain, and you need to consider and ponder, do I think I should move my hand because it is getting burned right now? No. Before you've even thought about it, literally, you have jerked your hand away, right? And so this actually helps when we start talking about reflexes. You don't need to send things all the way up here to think about them. It hits this relay and it's like, no, move your hand, right? Instinct, by instinct, right? It's a reflex. You don't even think about it, you just do it. Okay, should have put that in more than once. The pons links the cerebellum with the midbrain. It helps to tie it all together. Remember, the pons is right in the middle. And the cerebellum, right? This is the little part on the back. I'll go back to it. But this is your processing center for automatic things like movement. It adjusts muscles to maintain balance, and it fine-tunes your movement. If it's injured, it could cause ataxia or disturbance in balance. Right here. Fun story, or interesting story. My littlest child, she got some virus when she was like 2 or 3, and she was always running around really good. I mean, she's just very, very athletic. But she got a virus, and occasionally getting certain viruses can cause your cerebellar ataxia. The immune system cells that are fighting off the virus also will sometimes start attacking the cerebellum. And that happened to her, and for like a month, she just couldn't walk straight. I mean, she literally, like you were intoxicated, she just couldn't hardly maintain her balance. And it was because as a side effect of that virus and her immune system responding to it, her immune system was still kind of damaging her cerebellum. It recovered, she's fine, and she's like has the best balance of any of us. But it was an example of that can happen even if you get hit hard in the back of the head and it damages that region, right? And it's not because you can't perceive what is up or whatever, it's that you cannot coordinate your response when you're taking that step. Think of how fine-tuned every little muscle group has to be just for you to take a step. There's a lot that goes to it that is automatically regulated here. And if it doesn't work right, you don't get to have smooth motions. All right. The medulla, this connects the brain to the spinal cord. This regulates heartbeat and respiration. Some very basic things are regulated at the medulla. It's right above the spinal cord, and you don't need to think about regulating your heart rate, your breathing rate. They just need to happen, or you die. And those things, those very, very important things that you need to do all the time are regulated at the medulla. And the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the big part that I pointed out earlier. The main portion of this brain is the cerebrum. Oops. All right, so there was the cerebellum from the back. Okay, we've got the cerebellum here. That's falling off. And then this main part right here, all of this is all cerebrum. And that's what we have that is much larger for our body sizes than any other organism, is that really large cerebrum. That's where we have memory, personality, intelligence, decision-making, our sense of identity. That's what makes you is that cerebrum and what it houses. If your cerebrum wasn't functioning, could you still be alive? Sure, you could regulate all this other stuff, but there just wouldn't be any activity there. And that's what you would call someone who, is in a coma, might be in that point where their cerebrum's not really functioning, but everything else is, because all that stuff's automatic. Okay. Let's see. This gets into some things with memory, which we might take a look at tomorrow. I think we'll stop there, but we'll talk more about memory and what kinds of memories you can store in your cerebrum and how that kind of works, and talk about recall and everything else. But let's go ahead and stop there, and we'll take a look at this.